We have a population of starlings here. I really like them, especially since actually they don't bother me because they don't sit on short masts. They like the tall ones. So they basically only shit on rich men's boats. I based myself at Nairn for a few weeks, primarily because the marina is the cheapest along this whole coast. Nairn is also the driest town in Scotland, 22 inches of rain, which is about the same as I get at home in Suffolk. It's a lovely town. The Victorians were very fond of it. For many years it was as far north, as deep into real Scotland as the British railway system would let you get. Plus it has fabulous beaches. And while I was there they were holding the biggest shindig of the year, and one of the few where you don't have to pay to get in, which is nice. I like the Highland Games. You can see that most of the events were born out of having bugger all sports equipment. Running. Well, there's lots of space in Scotland to go running across. At Highland Games there are always at least 100 categories of running races, spanning all distances, ages, sexes and ability. The events have always been part of a proper Highland Games. I asked a man in a kilt why. He said that all people from mountainous regions, such as Greece and the fells and Scotland, where wheels and horses are all but useless, then human feet are the best form of transport. It was the way news was spread around, so young men who were good runners were valued members of society. Fit young men with good legs and good lungs. Today though, sadly across Britain, runners are often regarded merely as sweaty young blokes clad in day-glow, pointlessly pounding urban pavements. They also have the usual athletic events such as long jump and high jump. Dig any hole here and you'll find sand to jump into. Tug of war is also really popular. Again, all you need is a bit of rope and some mates of indeterminate age and fitness. Although a full team of overweight heavy drinkers from the pub or rugby club who know how to work together can wipe the floor with the lot of them. They also like events which involve throwing seriously heavy things around. There's one where the big buggers throw 56-pound weights as high over their heads as possible, which seems to be an occupation not entirely devoid of risk. Then there was a very long caber tossing session. I mean that both ways. The aim is to throw the astonishingly unwieldy 19-foot 6-inch long pole end over end. Apparently it's not about distance but about precision. 2 judges are required to fully assess quite how precise the toss is. And the knowledgeable and enthusiastic crowd are keen to reward a top-notch tosser. In the meantime, just a few yards down the green, the biggest and most debauched funfair of the year was going on all day, which at the time seemed culturally intrusive when set against all the heavy kilt-based activities which are the main events of the Nairn Games. But looking back at the images, everyone's having good fun in their own way. Nothing wrong with that. But back to the field of kilts, where the dancing competitions more or less go on all day. They're in all sorts of styles and costume and disciplines, but they are all traditional in their own way. People were dancing everywhere, even in the outfield. This nationwide passion for high-energy dancing is rather inspiring, I think. When it's well done, it is beautiful, graceful, nimble and entertaining. Although some of the dance moves, well, I'm not sure I'm qualified to fully understand exactly what they mean. As the day unfolded, more and more serious kilts started to appear across the showground and assemble themselves into a single, well-ordered group. I suggest that unless you're a fan of bagpipes, you might do well to skip ahead a little. Although, speaking for myself, I find them rather inspiring instruments, and I was about to get the taste of my life. I climbed up on a garden wall, with permission, and filmed them coming past. I've never been so close to this blast of sound from the massed ranks of pipers and drummers. To stand there and listen to the swelling power of these wonderful people was a real privilege. I envy the Scots for so many reasons. Their sailing waters are second to none. Strong tides, deep inlets, astonishing coastlines, and to cap it all, a right to roam. But I also admire them for the power of their culture. These games, uniforms, costumes, this music and dance have cultural references that go back 1,000 years. As a middle-class Englishman from the middle of England, where my cultural icons are supposedly Morris dancing and football, how can I be anything other than envious? As I look at the marching musicians, I like to think that you can see, in their faces and in the way they conduct themselves, echoes of the Highland peoples who fought so hard for their culture at Prestonpans, Stirling Bridge and Culloden. That evening I did venture to the funfair, mainly in search of chips, which I found aplenty. The weirdly worldwide nature of the eclectic iconography and thumping electronic sounds stood in stark contrast to the massed pipes that had filled my senses just a few hours earlier. But in among the revellers, having a great time, riding the rides, eating the intercontinental rubbish along with the rest of us, I recognised some of the younger bandsmen and women, now in everyday mufti. Good for them. Back in the harbour, snuggled down in my sleeping bag, half a mile or more from the funfair, the pulsing beat of the Balearic pack was reduced to little more than a gentle throb. As soon as there was enough water in the entrance, I left Nairn and turned left, running with the incoming tide, hugging this southern shore of sand flats and beaches. And one final fleeting visit from the dolphins before coming to the narrow part of the Murray, where the headlands of Fort George and Chanonry Point come to within 1,000 yards of each other. I'd like to beg your indulgence. Please allow me to show you just one more sand harbour before quitting the Murray. White Sands was once the queen of them all. Down in this corner of the Murray Firth, where all that meticulously shifted sand eventually comes. It's a place where the current runs at 4 knots. A place where the channel snakes between dunes that stand 40 feet above the sand-laden incoming flow. All along this 40 miles of Murray's southern coast, the wind and the waves have ground and shaped desert sand to almost white perfection. Fabulously perfect beaches, bars and estuaries were created, each one an ever-changing unique gem, which I've celebrated in previous films, but I've never been a big fan of pointlessly recapping what has gone before and foreshadowing what is yet to come. Go back and look for yourselves if you want to see them again. All there, laid out for your delectation. When this westward movement abruptly ends down in this corner, the sand is spread out to dry between tides, where the wind piles it into spectacular dunes and links. As you ride the current, drifting and bumping from side to side, occasionally grounding on a temporary sand ridge for a few minutes, then shifting on again as the current rises underneath you. One side of this schizophrenic estuary is all sand and shingle and tall waving spiky seagrasses, while on the other, the mighty relic that was once the Ardersier oil rig yard, opened in 1972 by McDermott's with the help of lorry loads of government subsidy. The scale of the place is hard to comprehend from the deck of a small yacht. It covers hundreds of acres. It once covered even more.
This is a pretty good flow here.
Only a government could ever be persuaded that locating a facility that requires deep water access in such a shallow, shifting, sand-accumulating sort of corner would ever be a good long-term investment. To be fair though, it's once employed 4,500 men building the oil rigs that unlocked the riches of the North Sea. But keeping a place like this open meant that dredging was hideously expensive and pretty much a continuous operation, as the sand from the eastern beaches constantly filled every hole the dredgers ever made. It was here, in this corner, where the government wasted an astonishing amount of money. There are some fabulous images on the web of McDermott's at its peak. Proper big engineer's wet dream it was. Airship hangar-sized sheds and 50-ton forklifts. Big men, big projects. Important work at the time. But it all went pop 3 decades later. So for the last 15 years, nature has been slowly reclaiming the place. One day, someday, the dunes will engulf the whole wharf. That is, until the next ice age, 20,000 years or more from now, when it'll all be shoved into the North Sea by the Murray Glacier.
It's gone aground.
I drifted warily inland, mindful of the fact that the tides were neaping and I had organised to borrow a friend's 4x4 to tow Katie home at the end of September. Being neap for a month in White Sands would have been a serious spanner in the works. So I turned tail and used a bit of the breeze to sail most of the way out.
I'm now sailing out for Funfair, and I'm going to go and have another crack at Canonry Point.
Then it's down to the narrowest part of the Firth.
Tide is ebbing pretty fast, and really there's bugger all wind, so I'm getting as close into this shore as I can. And it's 1.3 metres, and we're going at 1 knot. It's alright, I don't care.
This is the second Fort George. The first one was taken and destroyed by the Jacobites in 1746. So after the Catholic Highlanders had been culturally annihilated at Culloden, the second Fort George was built. It's a much more serious affair. Its purpose to keep the Highlanders in the hills and French ideas, money and small arms shipments out of Scottish politics. The English learned a lot from the Romans and built an empire by turning nations against themselves and their neighbours. So the second Fort George was garrisoned by regiments raised from the Protestant loyalist clans who could keep the Highlanders in check. Very small fabric-based joke there. Fort George was supposed to be impregnable, until they invented aeroplanes that could drop bombs, that is. The place has never been threatened though, and was an army base right through to 2007. Pretty astonishing, really. Fort George dominates and controls the point where the 60-mile wide funnel of the Murray grows to 1,200 yards or so. Control Fort George and you control access to the Highlands. Even during the neaps, the tide slops through here at a handsome lick. Only the foolhardy or hard-pressed would ever seek to defy the fourth tides. But the noisiest dolphin boat in Britain does defy them all day long, and comes out from Avon every hour to loudly blunder around the Narrows for a bit. Not the best platform from which to observe dolphins, I shouldn't think. You miss out on the sound of them for starters. Fortunately for dolphin enthusiasts, on the opposite side of the narrow divide to Fort George is a curvaceous single spit which ends at Shannonry Point, and is easily the best place in the UK from which to observe dolphins without going to the expense of being on a boat. Shannonry Point has a classic lowland lighthouse and a beautifully constructed and preserved ferry landing jetty, where for hundreds of years the hard-rowing ferrymen of the Murray Narrows would land their 20-footers laden with foot passengers, cargo and livestock. Shannonry Point was also a crucial military link, where large numbers of soldiers from Fort George could be landed, should the clans of the north start to get a bit restive. So great is the draw of a fleeting glimpse of dolphin fluke that even in bad weather and at all states of the tide, there was always someone hanging around with a pair of bins about their person. There are usually quite a few people sitting in the warmth of their cars or vans, slowly eating sandwiches and thoughtfully sipping thoroughly thermosed coffee while keeping a careful watch through misty windscreens for signs of a fin or a breach. On a good day, when the tide is rushing in and the salmon are running, you can usually count on a few of the Murray's 200 bottlenoses to turn up at Shannonry Point. But in the world of dolphin watching, nothing is guaranteed, and you can wait in vain for hours on end. The dolphins, when they come, are attracted by the easy pickings on offer, as the pelagic salmon ride the incoming tide through the 6-knot narrows of the Murray Firth. The salmon are focused on getting to their anointed spawning grounds in the shingly freshwater upper reaches of the Bewley. The tiniest flick of a fin will start texts and what's-ups flowing out across the campgrounds and caravan parks of the Black Isle Peninsula. Then the roads will block with motorhomes in a hurry, and hastily vacated estate cars are left willy-nilly on every verge. Young camping families and elderly itinerant motorhome owners cluster and bond, hoping for a sighting that might never come, but often does. I loved sailing past the Ness, witnessing the ever-changing human tableau of gentle nature lovers who invest so much time and energy in trying to get close to the Murray dolphins. I felt slightly guilty that their shore-based dolphin experiences would be so thin when compared to the richness of my close encounters with the Murray population of Britain's biggest resident predator. It's a reminder of just how lucky us sailors are. As my dad used to say, count your blessings and forget your woes. I spent a lot of time in this section of the Firth, much of it loafing around, waiting for the tide to slacken enough for me to get under the bridge at Inverness. The beauty of this short section of the Firth is bequeathed a piquant melancholy by being just a mile from Culloden Moor, where the exhausted, lied to, underfed, badly led and poorly armed Highlanders fought so bravely for hapless French fop Bonnie Prince Charlie. They stood shoulder to shoulder and were blown to smithereens by the relentless withering artillery and accurate small arms fire of German King George's splendidly supplied lowland invasion force. When the wind threatened to chip up, I spent several quiet nights, safely tucked away in Avon Harbour, one of my favourites.
This is Munlochy Bay.
But on quiet nights I dropped hook in my favourite hidey hole of Munlochy Bay, where the only other boat is an elderly westerly 22. Triple keel, low profile banana boat with more usable cabin space than you can believe possible. In Munlochy Bay, the muddy bottom sucked my modest anchor deep into its oozing embrace, and I could sleep soundly, probably within earshot of the murderous English artillery destroying the clans up on Culloden Moor, just across the narrow reaches of the Murray. It was a lovely place to sail, always a breeze, sheltered waters, but the peace is regularly disrupted for a moment or two by the clattering shuttle buses ferrying crews between Inverness and the platforms far out to sea. I think you can only fully appreciate a bridge if you've sailed underneath it. Then you can see it properly, at your leisure, at the speed of the water passing underneath. You can also hear it, both the way the traffic rumbles overhead and the waters surging or hissing below. There are even times when you can smell a bridge. After a few hours at sea, you can smell the acrid stink of hydrocarbons and hot metal, while the turbulent waters mixing and churning through the narrows underneath bring smells from the deep sea right into the city.
Little current front there.
I love these places for their power, for the interlinked happenstance of physical geography and human history. Sometimes even for the architecture of these massive East Coast bridges that span the firths where ferries once plied their trade. Choose your time and she's a pussycat of a place. But she knows how to turn on the taps, particularly on the flood, as that funnel of water, once 60 miles wide, then a mile at Channonry, and now here at Inverness, less than 1,000 yards, comes thundering in.
So behind this headland it's almost slack water, but just 20 feet over there, 30 feet over there, it's slopping in nicely. It's a pretty good springish tide actually. And then they start to neap away. You're good.
But apparently still a good place for a swim if you're hard enough. And when the weather really threatened to go wet for a few days, then there was little alternative to plugging into the Lecky, Wi-Fi, hot showers and tumble dryers of the shockingly expensive but almost perfect Inverness Marina. Just one more Murray film to come. If you'd like to chip in, then that would be wonderful. I apologise if emptying the YouTube space has proved inconvenient, but the hits and the comments were like empty calories. The apps brought no taps. Over here on the website, real people are much more likely to put something in the Buskers Cup than if the same people casually grazed the films in a YouTube app.